Okay, we are live here on Quantum Leap for March 22nd, 2022. And David and Cory here welcoming you to the broadcast. And this is actually our last broadcast for a while. For we kind of do this as a seasonal thing, but we do we'll have more to come soon. But um, Cory, just wanted to welcome you and see if you could just introduce yourself and do a quick check-in as we get started here on this first segment, which we're going to be talking about some business development secrets, really, and getting started there.
Hey, Cory Knott here, and business coach with Take Wing Coaching, and just having a big week with moving and everything else. So it's kind of thing that kind of interrupts the vision and goal setting and everything else when you don't expect to move and make a decision to do so. So it's interesting to talk about these things because so many things in life can get in the way of business development, and yet we have to find ways to work around that.
Yeah, no, that is a good actually starting point for discussion. I kind of call really our goal setting is kind of like our North Star of where we're headed. So even if we get thrown off course, maybe we go backwards or we get totally lost for a while. If you still have that goal, you need that ability to get back on track. And you have some great materials on this. I've seen you speak about it, about having this vision that keeps you on track. If you don't mind telling us a little bit about your kind of some of your thoughts on goal setting and really a process for how to get somebody started with this goal setting.
Yeah, we've worked over the years on different types of goals, and lots of people have different philosophies on that. And when I say we, it's my wife and I, Gail and I. So a lot of things that I develop, I work with her to develop so that it's not too philosophical. It's also practical and useful because she's very good at that. And I realized that there was we've talked a lot about vision. We've talked a lot about the why and the purpose, which I guess we're going to talk a little bit about later too. But in the goal setting, we wanted to have something that was more than just just set a goal and then make an action plan. I realize there's a lot more tied up into it, including the purpose, the reason for doing it, the stretch, and the ability to actually make that stretch and the reasons behind it. So I developed a template, and we had learned a process called Why Smart, which I thought was really interesting. So a lot of people are familiar with SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, or relevant. There's a couple different ways to look at that, and time bound. And I encourage anybody to kind of learn that process. And then we added a little bit more to it. And we worked with a coach who kind of showed us this, which is the why, which is it's written, it's harmonious, meaning it works within what you want to do. It's not from somebody else, and it is yours. It's your goal, not somebody else setting it for you. And I realized that that's great, but then there's a lot more that goes into that. And so we developed a template that we use with our clients that includes a lot of other things, not just the goal, but there's a benefit side to it. There's a rewards and there's a consequences. Yeah, everybody's kind of motivated or wired a little differently for that kind of thing. Gail likes the rewards. I like a mix of rewards and consequences. Like, if I don't do this, what's going to happen? And if I do this, what do I get? And then also affirmations, the things that kind of just get in the way of, or I'm sorry, when things get in the way, what are some things that we can kind of just tell ourselves to overcome that? And because goals are a stretch, and when we're stretching, all those little voices and things that all that negativity comes out pretty quickly and helps us stumble quite a bit. And then we have an action planning system where we look at milestones and break those things down into action plans, because a goal without a plan really is more just a dream.
Yeah, that's well put. And I know you've helped me a lot with my goals in terms of, I actually think there's so many different levels to goals. There's how to discover your overarching goal, but then
Right.
there's how to put your goal into action. I think, which you're so good at, that framework, the business framework, and that continues to evolve. And I know that that's really a main thing that Lyft helps people with, is to kind of stay on that track and keep building this framework that drives us to our goals. So There's another term that I love that is actually trademark. Maybe that's why I like it so much from the company that you were involved with for a while and that we still are connected to through a lot of good colleagues of ours. A term called emotionally charged connection, which is essentially discovering your purpose. But I love just this term of this emotionally charged connection because that's essentially like what our purpose is in kind of a shorthand way. So we question our uh, memories for our viewers of what that emotionally charged connection is and kind of why that's important and maybe how to get started figuring that out. And I know this is a huge topic, but we're just trying to
Yeah.
introduce it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not to step on, Ascentive's property in terms of their name, and I think it's a good name, and they also use it in the sense of it's a connection to other people, right? So when we kind of understand where we come from, and we're looking to build a referral network by being able to kind of get deep into our story, we can help other people connect to us. It's a deeper emotional connection to other people, and while I do feel that's important, I think that there's other uses for that within the context of business. And I've worked with other coaches too who do this similar, and we've developed our own kind of package around it. So the hat tip to Michael Turtis, who I'd love to have on this show at some point. He calls it the origin story. And that's a more generic term for those who are kind of into comic books or like, the Avengers or the DC world these days. The origin story is this sort of idea that, we we learn something that usually comes from trauma. And, so if you look at like a superhero, right, who derives power from being bitten by a spider, Spider-Man didn't become Spider-Man because he, was bitten by a Spider-Man. He became Spider-Man because he lost his uncle and, in a very traumatic fashion and had to, make a decision about how he was going to become, to help people or become a villain, really. And so, the origin story idea is kind of similar. We obviously aren't, have superpowers, but we do learn things from the traumas that we suffer in life and how to help others overcome similar trauma. And we do that through our work and the way we serve people. And it doesn't really matter what our work is, it's really kind of more in the service. And so if we can connect to that, and it doesn't have to be super trauma, but it's just something that, we learn through struggle, and then that helps us define our purpose, which we bring into whatever we do. And in a lot of cases, if we're not connected to that ourselves, like if we have this overriding sense of purpose that we can connect to and it's not part of our business, we either got to make it a part of the business or make a shift in business. And many times in my work, we've encountered people just feel like, and this happened for me too, where it's like, I am really not doing what I should be doing. I may be good at this, but it's not my life's work. And that's one of the reasons I shifted out of software and into coaching, because I really couldn't make that emotional connection to software development. I enjoy it, but it's not really a passion for me. And so I think that's really what it is the definition of our passion, our purpose, and our what we want to do as our life's work.
Right. And not so well, but I actually think Tony Robbins and Bob Proctor agree on one point that so few people know what that connection is. They even say, I
Sure.
think somewhere in the neighborhood of 98% of people don't, or 95. And, I think some of the most successful people, they know about it or they have a good enough idea. And there is different levels. You don't have to hit it exactly, but if you're completely lost there, that's a big part about why maybe your job isn't working out for you or something you're not happy with something, that if you can get better connected to that, it can help you find the right um, job. Sometimes it's a pivot within your existing um, kind of employment. Like I, for example, did communications, but when you help me get clarity on this, you help me connect with my ideal client because it's really about helping other people accomplish their dreams using video. So I'm not just doing video to do video to, I'm actually doing this specific thing. And that specificity is what unlocks all the power in connecting you to your ideal client. And that's something that you're very good at helping people do in your coaching. And I've kind of,
Yeah, I could say something a little more about that too, just real quick. I buried mine for many years, right? I didn't even know what my connection was, and it took a lot to get it out of me. And the person I worked with to do that, Don Lyons, who kind of developed a lot of the ECC along with Eddie Esposito and Mike Macedonio for Ascentive, it took her a long time too. I mean, she had this story that she worked on, and then she realized that wasn't it, and went even deeper. So I think, when you say 98% of people don't even know what it is, a lot of us, kind of bury that stuff, and that's one thing I'm really good at helping people get out of them. But I do encourage people to kind of work on that.
Yeah, no, I think if somebody's listening, they don't have an idea about that. I know you do offer targeted coaching sessions to really focus on this, and that is really the best kind of money spent, or it's something that everybody should do, even if you're not even a business owner. Maybe you're in a career, you're an executive, or
Sure.
maybe you're thinking about getting into the business world. I do have like one of my early modules done here about goal setting, and I'll just add a couple things that maybe you can react with. I haven't I'm going to show this to you at some point once I have more of the modules done. We'll kick it around, but um, I kind of introduced that as the North Star, and a guy named Maxwell Maltz and cyber cybernetics. So I'm sure you've heard about this book, where kind of a rocket fails its way to the moon, so we have to head in that direction, and then it course corrects, and that's kind of how our goal is. That we, and I think a big mistake that most people, they don't set a goal because they don't know how to reach it, but
Right.
you're not going to know how to get there. For example, if you want to build, a business that earns you $400,000 a year, you would already have that business if you knew how to do it. So but I think that's why you need a coach in some ways, because you're not going to know how to reach it. And the key thing here, and I call this kind of the Bob Proctor method, although I think he really developed it with, if you read, Tony Robbins and some of the other folks, all of them have a very similar process on some of this stuff. And makes me,
Yep.
I think a lot of it goes back to Think and Grow Rich, that book and some of these key books. But I'll just run through a couple of these criteria, and feel free to comment or interject. But really, the most important thing is that it's a worthy goal. And I think before you even get to the goal, you want to look at that emotionally charged connection, because if you don't have a look at that connection, what drives you, that's what enables you to set the right goal. But
Right.
if you don't unbury that, as you're saying, so um, I think, a lot of people don't hit their goal because they set the wrong goal, or they set one that's too low. So it has to be something that you can get excited about, and you should know how to reach it. That's a key thing. Um, a lot of times, then you actually want to write down your goal and get some specificity on it. And I know Lyft has a lot of great worksheets on this. Bob Proctor and John Maxwell do this too, about some questions. If you just pull out a piece of paper about, you know, before you get to your goal, you actually have kind of like what you think your goal is, where you write down your beliefs, where your beliefs come from, what are your goals in your life and business. So you really want to like get all these things around your goal. That's that emotionally charged connection. So there's kind of a lot to do here, but and that's why I think Lyft is good at breaking this down in a easy to do process about your purpose and your goal setting. But essentially, I think the place to start, and my business coach had me do, is go to a quiet place, where the kids are at school or they're gone if you have kids, and then just visualize what you really want. If you could, what do you really want out of your life and business? And you just have to be able to give yourself the freedom and the ability to kind of, don't think, well, your first reaction is always going to be, I can't do that. If you do want to have your own business, and maybe you want to be a business coach like a lot of people in Lyft, don't let that dissuade you. I think that's a huge growing field. Or maybe you do want to go back and get a PhD in psychology and be a professor, whatever that may be. You can get there. And then the key thing is taking action right away about how to get your goal. So this was a little bit long-winded, but if you have any thoughts on some of that stuff, and I think this is the hardest part, is really just getting started initially. And sometimes somebody might read that or see this worksheet, and they might not do anything for a month, but it kind of gets them on the right path to where maybe they get a business coach, maybe they sign up for something like Lyft.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's something, the actual, there's two processes that I think you're talking about there. One is the deciding what the goal ought to be, and then actually doing the goal setting. So I do tend to focus a lot more on the goal setting versus the process of deciding what the goal should be. And that does come from the vision, the ECC and all that, or the why. But so I think that that's a good point, sitting down and actually kind of figuring out what is the goal going to be for a year. If you have a vision for 3 to 5 years out, you have some idea of what the goal ought to be, but there may not be a number behind it. So you've got to figure that part out. And then I believe that there's a really important part of the goal setting process, which is the action planning. And the action planning will tell you a lot more about whether a goal is achievable than just kind of setting a goal. Like if I want to make, $100,000 this year and I'm at a certain number, it may seem achievable when you kind of just put the number out there. But once you start breaking down the action plan, there's a lot of steps, and there may be a lot more people involved, and there's a lot of dates, and actually, it becomes, I have a project management background. So in project management, we set dates to everything, and we watch as things, slip, and you put these on charts and so on. And I don't expect everybody to be like that, but having those dates is important. And we take a number of clients through that process, because they'll come up with some plan that they want to do. All right, let's put a goal to that plan and create the action steps behind it, and see if this is reasonable, or maybe what shifts you have to make it reasonable.
Great. And what now you've been working a lot on accountability, as we've mentioned. I was just going to see if you can share what you've maybe learned about accountability and how you can help with that as a business coach or the Lyft platform.
Yeah, and I think that you talk a lot about John Maxwell and Bob Proctor and so on, and I'm sure they all use some measure of accountability, and looking at what these big names do, especially the ones who do a lot of writing and produce a lot of information. A lot of them, are stuck just like us other human beings. Some people are very good at taking action, but they're also thinkers, right? So they're spending a lot of, they have a tendency to, and to do things. So they use an accountability tool, which is just talking to somebody else every day about the things that they're going to do, and then get it done. And so I thought, why not have something that we could do that with too, where we have sort of this daily or weekly accountability tool where people just check in and give their names. And we started it in February. I've been a little bit lax on it because of this house move, which is probably more of an excuse than anything else. And what's been interesting about the process is to see where the excuses come up, to see what I'm prioritizing and what other people are prioritizing. And it's an evolution. You start off just saying, okay, I want to get these things done today. And then they start to think about, okay, what am I really truly prioritizing here? And what am I avoiding doing and saying I'm going to be held accountable for? So I think there's a lot of thinking behind it too, and processing that goes on. And I'm finding it to be an interesting system. So I'm looking forward to more people participating in that.
Great. And one thing that I think really helps a lot is something I call daily practice. And I think starting to do this was what made the big difference in my life about, really you got to revisit these goals every day, or at least keep them kind of top of mind, with some visualization. A lot of people, I haven't really done much with the meditation, although some of this is kind of like a meditation on your goals.
Yeah.
But then there's affirmations that you have to kind of convince yourself that you can do this. And there's a lot of different kind of, I think, kind of sub goals, so to speak, kind of how you have your SMART goals. So, there's no really one way to do it, but I think it's coming up with a daily practice that works for you, that keeps you on track. And I think that's what's important. It's also not only a daily practice, but it's kind of a weekly practice, because some days everything's going to get thrown out the window, but maybe one day a week we revisit our business plan or that framework, or maybe it's one day a month. So I think I know Bob Arts, who we had on as an all-star, some of this calendaring of every little thing, not
Right.
every little thing, but like key chunks that are just going to get lost if you don't do it. So, I think that's a valuable thing. I don't know if you've learned anything about daily practice, what works for you. And
Yeah. I have a thing I call it my executive briefing, and in the business world with executives, right, they have like this thing where they check in and like what's going on in the business today, and it's like a board meeting. I don't know, I've never been to an executive briefing, but I love the name, and so it's sort of more of an executive briefing with myself, and I actually have it's like a book, though I keep mine in a digital notebook because I don't keep a lot of paper around. But I have, on the front page, I keep, my business purpose, my personal purpose. I have vision. I have all those little statements, right, that it can easily just go through. And then page after page, there's the vision, and then the set of goals, and then there's a set of affirmations. And I'm looking to develop this further. So I think it's something we ought to talk about, David, because I'd like to know what you put into yours. And I don't think everybody has to have everything in it, but I find it to be very inspiring. And you're right. I think the more we connect with these things when we write them down, the more we self-inspire. And for those people who tend to be kind of stuck and a lot of negative thoughts and so on, this is one way to really overcome that. So that's something, yeah, I'd really like to talk to you more about, especially on the visualization, because I tend to be a self-talker. So visualization isn't a big thing for me, but some people really respond to imagery more than they do words. And so that's a
yeah, no, I'd love to. I love that
that.
that name for it, executive briefing too. That's kind of what I do. I'm actually looking for a little bit some more robust stuff with the actual framework of goals, not the kind of big picture, but you also need the kind of revisiting that model of what you're going to do day in, day out, maybe at night or so. So let's talk about that. I'd love to do a little session on that once we get it worked out to kind of share some of these thoughts. So I think there's a huge space for innovation here, because I don't think that any one person has these systems all figured out, because it's so unique to the person. So the more we learn about it and try different things, the more we can set the table for people to find something that works for them.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is it's an evolving practice. It's the things that I put into my executive briefing. I don't think anybody's even thought of putting into their systems, unless there's a few people in high-end personal development have some of it, and then there's other people here who have some of it, and I just kind of draw on it all together. And it sounds like you've got some pretty cool tools too. So let's do it. I know we
Yeah.
kind of diverted from our discussion of business development, but this is kind of the way it works. There's so much we can do to improve our business function and enjoyment.
Yeah, no, well put. That's exciting stuff. And with that, I think we're going to end this first section of Quantum Leap. We're actually going to bring on your longtime friend and colleague, and our fellow BNI colleague, Hugh Groman, in a couple minutes. So thanks. Dave and Cory signing off for Quantum Leap, the first segment on March 22nd. Thanks for joining us, everyone.